Owen Sheers, and it's about farmers in France in the present day finding bones and skeletons in the fields when they're ploughing the land. These skeletons and bones are from the soldiers who died during World War I. The poem switches between the past, describing the deathly battle, and the grisly discovery of the skeletons in the present.
I like the way that he uses this idea of nature, so unearthing these memories, literally unearthing the bodies of the soldiers, and it's quite nice he's doing it from his perspective.
Yeah, I think the thing that strikes me is how, although it's quite a horrific event, it was a famous battle, lots of people died, it's written in a very sort of understated way. It's not sort of in-your-face graphic, the horror of it. For instance, the shoulder blade to China. It's quite fragile and gentle, and I think it's a reminder that people can often forget about this war because it's so long ago. How important it is to keep Remembrance Day, to remember how many people died and what for, because it's obviously set a long time after the actual...
I'd just like to add to that you're talking about sort of the distance and that it happened a long time ago, so possibly writing it in the third person helps to give that feeling of distance and detachment, making it more objective almost.
The thing that I noticed about the language was this use of wasted young. So obviously this wasted, you've got the decaying of the bodies that were found by the farmers, but also it means that the soldiers died before the time really. They weren't ready, and it emphasises that they were only young, bearing into adulthood, and they were dying in this horrific battle.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, the next line continues, so you've got the wasted young, the dead soldiers, however you've got the personification of the earth as they tended the land back into itself, and it's sort of suggesting that the earth can recover from the damage that war causes, however the soldiers can't, they're dead, and that's it. And the personification carries on throughout the poem, as though earth is being personified as someone that needs healing, and also as someone guarding the soldier's memory, where it says, and even now the earth stands sentinel, reaching back into itself for reminders of what happened. They also use a simile, like a wound working a foreign body to the surface of the skin. It sort of links with the healing process.
Can I just add to that also, saying that it's like a foreign body working its way to the surface? It's almost like the earth needs to be removed of those horrors that actually took place.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think the other thing as well is the comparison of soldiers to birds, probably because obviously birds are quite vulnerable in nature and quite exposed. So, for instance, in the second stanza, you know, the skull's being described like a broken bird's egg, giving you the image of how fragile it is and how easy it is to break. And nesting machine guns is mentioned a little later on, and at the end as well, the singing, as if the notes they had sung have only now, with some earthing, slipped from their absent tongue. So again, a link to birds in nature out there being vulnerable.
Yeah, also with the you've got the dance in the on this line, the skeleton's paused. It's interesting that you've got this aspect of positive imagery in there, singing and dancing, which contrasts obviously with all the negative images of them being buried and the skeletons.
So in terms of structure then, it's got a very narrative feel to it. There's 7 stanzas, it's chronological really, isn't it? It starts off about the war and then the horror of the war, and then the farmers actually finding the bodies sometime later.
Yeah, what I find interesting about this poem is it doesn't rhyme, but then you've got this run and guns that's kind of half rhyme. So it emphasises they were told to walk, not run, so they were being an easy target. They were walking to the death, then they had to know that at the time that, you know, they would die.
Yeah, what I noticed another feature of the structure is that it uses enjambment at the end of lines, and the long sentences I think give it a reflective sad tone, and also sort of the pace is quite slow, which makes it sort of more of a gentle reminder, almost like you were saying earlier. It's not such a in detail about the horrors of war, it describes it more, comparing it to nature. You also said about it building up chronologically to the present, where the poet describes the most recent find of the bones, and throughout that the tone and pace don't change really, which again suggests that, you know, it's something, you know, the first find, the last find are all equally important, as is the war, even though it happened so many years ago.
I like that idea how you said that it's quite a slow tone, slow pace. It makes the reader appreciate actually what the soldiers experienced back then and understand that why they need to be remembered.
It almost sounds like a eulogy that will be read at some sort of remembrance service today, to remember the people that died at Mametz Wood. I really like this poem. I think it's a really gentle reminder of what we need to remember. Remembrance Day every year. It's very easy, I think, to forget about these events that happen, but we really can't forget about them, because certainly, you know, if these events happen again, we'll see lives lost to that level. It will be horrific. So I think it reminds us all that it's really important to remember those that died, especially in the First World War, because they were so young and so many. And like I say, it's easy to forget, I think, when you live your life day to day.
I think what strikes me is the horror, really, sort of knowing that these men never sort of found their way home, and their families didn't have the opportunity to properly mourn for them because they're all buried together in one grave. So it's almost like they weren't given the respectful, honourable burial that sort of are led to believe. Like now we have the repatriation ceremonies, you know, in the country, and quite a lot is made of it, which is really important. And I just think, you know, for survivors of these soldiers not to have, you know, knowledge of where their relatives might be, and just sort of imagining how they were treated by all being flung into one grave, maybe out of necessity because they were in the middle of battle, but it really hits home, and definitely in contrast with the sort of the gentle feel just in a farmer's backyard, going about their daily job, and then they find such a gruesome discovery of the past.
Yeah, I like this idea of what you said at the end of the poem, absent tongues, obviously because they're dead, they never got a chance to tell their story, their experiences of war, so in a way the writer is able to do this through the poem, showing the true horrors that happened, so giving the soldiers a voice.
Okay, one of the poems that I think Mametz Wood links well with is The Falling Leaves, mainly due to the sort of the nature analogy continuing in The Falling Leaves, sort of thinking about the land and the leaves obviously in that poem, and how the land is sort of suffered with the burial of the soldiers in this poem, but also through the slow pace of both of the poems and the gentle tone that they have. And I think using nature to sort of compare with the horrors of war is a very interesting way to go about it, and it does, in some way it takes away the gruesomeness of it, but then on the opposite side it almost adds to it, because, you know, everyone imagines walking in autumn leaves and the snow falling, and you have all these nice positive associations with that, but then the poet very cleverly uses those associations to sort of show how many men died, and then here again with the nature, it's just a normal field and the discovery underneath the earth. What do you think?
I think Mametz Wood links nicely with Out of the Blue, just because, like the soldiers, the man in Out of the Blue doesn't have control of his own fate, what will happen to him. Like the soldiers were told to walk, not to run, so obviously it links with death as well.
I compare it to Poppy's. I mean, Poppy's obviously associated with the same war as well, but in Poppy's, obviously her son's not with her, who's died in the war, and she doesn't really know what's happened to him. She doesn't know the full story, so she's left to sort of wonder and think about what's happened to him, and then remember him when he was younger. So that idea of lost loved one, I think, links quite well.